I'm digging this. Well, we hope that you'll enjoy getting to reach out to them. And also want to mention, we are going to have a formal mixed with informal debate today. So by that I mean we are going to have formal sections, and that means we're going to have 10-minute openings, followed by 8-minute rebuttals, followed by a 12-minute discussion, and then 5-minute closings and Q&A. And we are also going to have question and answer, which has, if you have any questions, if you can put your question in the live chat, we will fish it out and then we will ask people during the debate. So, namely, whichever speaker you want the question to be asked to. So we're excited for that. And last, if this is your first time here, consider hitting that subscribe button. We're thrilled to have you here, like we said, no matter what worldview you are. So with that, just want to give the speakers a chance to share what they've been up to with maybe like 1 or 2 sentences at their channel or blog in terms of their projects and so on. So Standing for Truth, if you just want to mention maybe in 1 sentence or 2 what you've been up to at your channel, which by the way, folks, is linked in the description. You guys can check out that content for both of our speakers. So Standing for Truth, thanks for being here. And in a sentence or 2, what have you been up to at your channel?
Well, thanks again, James, for having me on. Thanks again, Dr. Frello, for doing this debate. Just the usual, putting on discussions, debates. We've had Dr. Ken Hovind on a couple times. Definitely some really good debates. I'd recommend going to watch those, and just putting out clips and just random videos, kind of promoting creation and debunking evolutionism. Thanks, James.
You bet. Also, Dr. Frello, thanks for being here. We're thrilled to have you. If you want to share any sort of projects you've been working on, we're very glad to have you here with us today.
Well, I actually don't have a YouTube channel, so nothing is going on in that direction, but I have a web page. The link to that will be on my first slide, so people can look that out, and also my email address will be there. Not much in the creation evolution debate kind of thing has been going on, except that I have been preparing for this debate.
You bet, absolutely. So if anybody wants to see more of Dr. Frello's content, you can see it there. And with that, I'm going to start the timer. Standing for Truth is going to start, and I will give each speaker a 3-minute warning once they are 3 minutes away from their closing, or I should say the end of their time allotted to them. And maybe I misunderstood. I'm sorry. Was it Standing for Truth or Dr. Frello going first?
No, I think you're going to have me going first.
Oh, okay. Then, Dr. Frello, if you're able to wait for the share screen once Standing for Truth goes into the share screen mode.
It's me who shared, unless we both shared at the same time.
Oh, okay. So sorry. My mistake. No. You got it right, Standing. I saw his name and I just for some reason I thought it was the wrong slide presentation. We're set to go.
I can see Standing's presentation now.
Perfect. Thanks so much. That was my fault, not Dr. Frello's. By the way, our delay, thanks for your patience, everybody in the audience. My fault as well. So thanks for your patience. We appreciate you being here. One thing, last, I just want to mention this really quick because I'm excited about it. The other day, we are thrilled, thanks so much for your help, as we raised $78 that was donated to the Cure Alzheimer's Fund. So we're really excited about that. And with that, Standing for Truth, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks again, Dr. Frello. Let's get this going. I'm looking forward to this debate with Dr. Stefan Frello, creation versus evolution. Let's start off here by saying mutations, they happen. And evolutionists will say, well, since mutations happen, which are changes in the DNA, of course, then with infinite time, a bacteria-like organism will turn into a whale. But what we observe is actually devolution and not evolution. This is predicted under a biblical-based model. It's like this. Overwhelmingly, mutations, they break things that were already there in some organisms, of course. This is actually beneficial in some circumstances. Think of it this way. Think of your car, and suppose your life depended on you getting better gas mileage for your car. What is a quick and easy way of getting better gas mileage? Well, of course, you can throw things away. You can take off weight, you can rip off the doors and throw them off. Take the hood and throw it away. Of course, those are useful in obvious circumstances, but if your life depended on it, it will be beneficial to throw those out. And I think Michael Behe puts it perfectly here when he says Darwinian evolution proceeds mainly by damaging or breaking genes, which counterintuitively sometimes help survival. In other words, the mechanism is powerfully devolutionary. It promotes the rapid loss of genetic information. Laboratory experiments, field research, and theoretical studies all forcefully indicate that as a result, random mutation and natural selection make evolution self-limiting. Darwin's mechanism works chiefly by squandering genetic information for short-term gain. Now, let's put this to bed right now. A lot of evolutionists, they'll use fossils as evidence for evolutionists, for evolution. And evolutionists say you've got this type of fossil in this layer and these types of fossils in these layers, and they think that it goes from marine fossils to land fossils in the order of evolution. Well, this is incorrect. And we've got marine fossils all the way through. Even with dinosaur fossils, we've got marine fossils buried with them. In fact, the order of the fossils is the burial order of the flood. And so if the flood began in the ocean, ripping up all those marine creatures and burying them on the continents, they would be the first creatures to be buried. And as the flood waters rose higher, you get the burial of land animals. And this is all exactly what we find given the biblical-based model and the account in Genesis of a global flood. Everywhere we look, there is abundant evidence from geology that the flood really did occur. Nothing in the fossils support evolution. What the fossil record supports is massive death and burial on a global scale. This is exactly what the Bible describes, as I've said. When we go to the first layers with an abundance of fossils in them, we see no fossils, and then layers with every one of the body plans of the major divisions of creatures and animals, which we would call the phylum. The geologists call this the Cambrian explosion. We go from layers with no fossils to layers with fossils, as complex as trilobites. If you know a trilobite has a very, very complex lens system. And yet we see no real hint at ancestors below this and prior to this. These creatures are fully formed and fully functioning. Why? Well, they've all been living before the flood and they are suddenly buried. The fossils scream out evolution no, and God's word yes. One of the predictions of the global flood model, just to confirm it, is catastrophic plate tectonics. Now, if plates are being pushed down, they haven't had time to melt. We have this new field of science called seismic tomography. With this new form of science, they have learned that massive cold slabs of rock exist at the base of the mantle, which means they've been pushed down there recently and have not melted. This is huge confirmation of the global flood model, and more specifically, the model of catastrophic plate tectonics. We see rapid or no erosion between sediment layers. We see flat, featureless boundaries. Evolutionists can't use fossils because fossils, the geology we see, it belongs to the creationists. All the evidence points to a global flood. We find whole rock layer sequences deposited rapidly in quick succession. Look at the walls of the Grand Canyon, from the tapetes at the top to the Kaibab limestone at the top. It's supposed to be representing 300 million years of slow and gradual sedimentary deposition. When the plateau was pushed up, those rock layers were bent and folded, but they were folded without fracturing. They had to be soft if they were bent without fracturing. That means they could have only just been deposited. This means the 300 million years never happened. All those rock layers had to rapidly be deposited in quick succession in the flood year. So lining things up, it's not going to prove anything. Interpretations and assumptions. As you can see here in the slide, you can literally line up a variety of dog skulls and make the data fit a wide range of evolutionary fairy tales. What do we predict? Death, degeneration, and extinction. The case for human genetic degeneration is very persuasive on the scientific level. It's clear. Mutations are not construction, they are destruction. Mutations overwhelmingly cause corruption and loss of biological information. The human mutation rate is approximately 100 new mutations per person per generation. And so that indicates that mutations are entering the human population at a rate much faster than natural selection could ever possibly select away such mutations. And these low impact deleterious mutations are degenerating our information systems. Picture it this way. We have a genome of 3 billion letters. If you take out one letter or change one letter randomly, will you have a huge fitness effect? No, it will have a tiny fitness effect. And in fact, it's like rust on a car. You can't see each rust event, but it's continuous and it's destructive. Look at this graph here. When biblical lifespans are plotted against the number of generations since Noah, we see an amazing and systematic decline in life expectancy. The pattern of decline reveals a very clear biological decay curve. The extreme longevity of the early patriarchs is perfectly documented in Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua. And the lifespan data here strongly supports the historicity and truth of the Bible, and in particular, the book of Genesis. All evidence points to a biblical base model. The lifespan data is shown here and revealed in the Bible indicates that the extreme longevity of the early patriarchs is 100% real. This also reveals that the rapid decline of longevity after the flood is undeniable. And these facts strongly and irrefutably support the biblical perspective of ongoing degeneration since the fall. In light of recent scientific findings, the documented decline in longevity is best understood in terms of deleterious mutation accumulation and, of course, genetic entropy. It's a fatal blow. The declining longevities strongly indicate that evolution is going the wrong way and the evolutionary timeline is not viable. So empirical evidence suggests that everything, including all life, is subject to entropic decay. And just like we see as recorded in the Bible, the fall is obviously 100% real, had to have been recent. And prior to this genetic degeneration, Adam and Eve would have had 0 mutations. The absolute reality of this genetic entropy means that Goodyear evolution is going the wrong way. Things are degrading. Things are not being taken forward. We have evidence here with all the different sources. Mammoth populations carried a high genetic load, of course. Paper here that talks about the genome, if it's even 10% functional, it makes human evolution impossible based on what we know about genetic degeneration. Now, let's look at this. This is directly from Replacing Darwin. I want you to look at this visually. I want to point out the fact, and Dr. Stefan Frello is going to know about this, that these lines all come back to a common origin and basically 3 different common groupings. There is also subgroups, of course. This is not a point of dispute, as even the evolutionists themselves recognize this fact. We call these in technical terms the 3 major haplogroups, L, M, and N. This is standard evolutionary science and belief. Stefan Frello won't even dispute the fact that there are 3 major groupings. I am defending biblical creation, and therefore when we look at this mitochondrial map, what is the maternal ancestry of the human population? Well, we start with Adam and Eve, who then have many children. We move quickly here to the time of the flood, and how many female lineages survive the flood? Well, there's Noah and his wife. Noah's wife passes on mitochondrial DNA to her sons, but it stops there. Noah's 3 sons obviously do not pass on their mitochondrial DNA, but their 3 wives do. And so we all trace back to 3 women. And what's astounding is that we see these 3 major groups. It's remarkable that we can then identify these 3 major haplogroups as the wives of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. What's remarkable as well is the relative pattern, as we know that DNA differences are a marker of time and they're a marker of thousands of years, not hundreds of thousands of years. And so how many generations were pre-flood and how many were post-flood are important questions. Reading Genesis, we know that on the paternal side, there were about 1,600 years or 10 generations or so consisting of very long lifespans, where we actually see the lifespans dropping off quite rapidly post-flood. And so probably got a couple hundred generations post-flood. Therefore, we see very little time for mutation pre-flood and longer branches post-flood, indicating more generations and more differences / mutations. The mutations would also explain the long African branch. We have a few potential explanations. Africans could undergo a faster rate of change, or even an explanation involving UN data in the 70s that tells us women on average in Africans married early, whereas the rest of the globe, not so much. If this was true historically, Africans would have gone through twice as many, maybe 3 times as many generations and therefore mutations than non-Africans. How much more time do I have, James? Awesome. There's tons more evidence. We can look at predictions right from the Bible. Low genetic diversity is what we see. Points us right back to Adam and Eve. 1 Y male ancestor, Y chromosome Adam, 1 mitochondrial DNA female ancestor. The fact that most genes come in 2 versions. We see that all people are closely related, only a few mitochondrial lines, the Y chromosome line, and evidence of rapid population growth. Genetics, the Bible is directly in the genetics. All human beings are profoundly similar genetically. This points directly to Adam and Eve. Like I said, mitochondrial Eve, Y chromosome Adam. Genetics, for example, the out of Africa story, it's directly what the Bible would predict. So thank you so much for listening, Dr. Frello, and thanks again, James.
Okay. Okay, so you should be able to see my first slide now. Yeah, okay. As I says, my name is Stefan Frello, and if you have any questions for me, then my email is here, and also I have a webpage that you can look at. There. I have a few points that I will go through in my presentation. First, that beneficial mutations actually do occur, and not only as deletions, but also as actual new genes in the genome, and that the transitional forms between former and present day animals actually do exist, that the fossil record actually is a good argument for evolution, that what we see in the natural world is the nested hierarchies that we should expect from evolution, and that accumulation of genetic complexity is actually possible, which it should be if evolution is true. First, on beneficial mutations. According to the theory of evolution, descent with modification through natural selection working on random mutations. If that occurs, some mutations must be beneficial in the sense that they result in higher fitness, measured as higher reproductive success. And the prediction from this is that it is possible to measure the growing fitness when individuals from different generations are compared. And
I think it's.
here is an example of that.
Forgive me, Dr. Frello. So sorry.
Yeah?
I'm pausing your time so you won't lose any time. I think it's. They had asked if you can speak more closely to the microphone. It's just a little.
Okay, I'll try that.
Thank you.
Okay. This example is from water fleas and a couple of their parasitic, their parasites. Water fleas lay eggs in the sediments of lakes, and actually those eggs can survive for several years. So if you take eggs from water fleas, which in lower layers of sediment in a lake, then those eggs will be several years old. And if you then try to infect them with parasites which are found in the upper layers of the sediment, then they will infect them. But if you try to infect water fleas from the upper layers of the sediment and with parasites from lower layers in the sediment, and therefore older parasites, they will not infect them. And that is explained by evolution in the way that the water fleas has evolved an immunity towards the parasites, so that newer forms of parasites are more virulent to the water fleas than older forms of parasites, because the water fleas has evolved resistance to the parasites, so that the forms of parasites that are several years old can no longer infect the water fleas. And this is exactly what we see in this example. The same is seen when bacteria is used. This is the so-called long-term evolutionary experiment by Richard Lenski. It has been going on for several years now. 12 identical cultures of E. coli bacteria has been grown for 70,000 generations in a uniform environment. And if you compare recent and old generations or versions of the same culture, you see that the more recent generations will outcompete the older generations. So if you take a sample of several thousand generations old bacteria and combine them with more recent bacteria, then the recent ones will outcompete the older ones because they have gone through more generations of selection. And actually, also we have examples of new functional genes or new functions in existing genes. We also have examples of brand new genes, but I'll come back to that. But this example is actually quite interesting because one of the proteins that make up the flagellum in the E. coli bacteria, the flagellum is a very famous example in the creation evolution debate. And one of the genes that takes care of one of the initial steps of the formation of the flagellum is called FLEC-Q. And in one strain of E. coli, the FLEC-Q gene was removed. It was not just mutated, it was completely removed. And therefore the E. coli strain was immutable. It couldn't move. But after a number of generations, two mutations occurred in another gene, completely unrelated to the flagellum. And it took over the function of the FLEC-Q gene and initiated the formation of the flagellum. So this gene, unrelated gene, mutated in a way so that it replaced the gene that was missing. Oh, okay. Okay. Next topic, transitional forms. According to the theory of evolution, descent with modification must result in a number of transitional forms. And the prediction here could be that we could hope to find living species looking as transitional forms between two stages, or we could hope to find transitional forms in the fossil record. And it's very important to make sure that you understand that a fossil transitional form should not be expected to be intermediate between two modern species. It should be intermediate between a common ancestor and a modern species. There is sometimes some confusion in that topic. Here we have a number of species from the family Skinkidae. I don't know how to pronounce it in English. Some have 4 fully formed legs. Some have only the hind legs fully formed and very, very short front legs, and some have no legs at all. So this is a clear example of the two forms with very short legs being intermediate between the normal sized leg and no leg at all, just as predicted by the theory. And also in the fossil record, we have a number of examples. The left ones is a number of intermediate forms between reptile kind lower jaw, which has I think it's up to 4 bones in the lower jaw of a reptile like a snake or a lizard. But in a mammal lower jaw, there's only 1 bone. And what is seen in the fossil record is various different intermediate forms where you can see the reduction of size of 3 of the bones in the lower jaw. And actually they end up as the bones in the inner ear of mammals. And what is interesting here is that at least some of these bones has a function as helping in the hearing of or the sense of hearing in reptiles. So they keep their function, but they change their position. What did you say? 3 minutes? Yeah. Okay. Also in whales, we see the movement of, or the first fossils have the nostrils in the tip of the nose, and then it moves backwards to the top of the head. And whales are actually very interesting here because the first fossils of the whales, the oldest fossils of whales have fully formed hind legs, while intermediates, the Basilosaurus here, has somewhat reduced legs, and what is left in the modern whales are only a few bones. But if you look at the bone structure of the fossil whales, you can sometimes see a unique structure in the ankle bone, which is only found in even-toed ungulates and fossil whales. And interesting, the genetics shows that whales are more closely related to even-toed ungulates than to any other group of mammals. Also, in fossils, actually, we have living species, living animals from before the Cambrian period, called the Ediacaran period. And all these different fossils here are animal fossils, but it is impossible to say what they are related to to modern animals, because they are so strange. When you compare them to modern animals, it's impossible to say what they are. They are all, of course, extinct. If we go to the Cambrian, if we go to the Cambrian, fossils become more identical or more identifiable. You can now see that they are what phylum they are related to, but still all of these are extinct. And you have to appreciate that a phylum is a very broad group of animals. All mammals, birds, reptiles, fish belong to one single phylum. So it's a very, very inclusive group. And all of these different species here are associated to a modern phylum, but all of them are extinct. The same is true for a lot of other animals in later layers. I don't think I probably can't. The time is probably out now, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your opening statement, Dr. Frello. And with that, we will go into the rebuttal phase. So we'll go back.
Stop the share screen.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you bet.
Yeah.
And also, just want to remind everybody, if you have a question, you could put it into the Q&A or the live chat. We'll read your questions during the Q&A. If you have a super chat, I forgot to mention at the start, basically we put it at the top of the list. And also, super chats can be a question or a comment. So if you might want to make a brief comment towards one of the speakers that they would get to respond to during the question and answer, you can do that as well. So 8 minutes are set on the timer for you standing for truth, and I will start it on your first word.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your opening there, Dr. Frello. So I'm going to try and cover as much as I can here. Maybe kind of start with beneficials. So it looked like a lot of the examples he did, he's looking at adaptation, and now he's calling it, evolution. For example, the Lenski experiment. I mean, after thousands and thousands of generations, what have we learned? We've learned that bacteria produce bacteria, and these bacteria are actually now more handicapped. We see shrinking functional genome sizes. As I said in my opening, these bacteria, they've lost genes short term, but it's long term degeneration. So if genes are losing, and if genes are being lost or genes are being shut off, if adaptive degeneration is being seen, this is an evolution. This wouldn't be evidence for large-scale fish-to-fisherman type evolution. He had the whale fossils there for a while, the presumed transitional forms. I've got them written down here. He showed Pakicetus, Ambulocetus, Rhodocetus. Those are all highly questionable. And, his claim that these are all whale precursors, it's mostly based on, wishful thinking, storytelling, speculation. That's kind of what I've seen a lot of, was storytelling and speculation, because Stefan Frello here, he misses the bigger picture. So even if I were to give him one or two beneficial mutations, one or two beneficials are not going to be able to counterbalance the information lost based on the accumulating damage from low impact near neutral deleterious mutations. They are accumulating in the genome. So he's going to have to He's going to have to answer that. And no one's disagreeing with natural selection. He talked about natural selection at first. That's a fine-tuning mechanism. It keeps the species as strong as it can be. And for example, Pakicetus, which he had there, formerly assumed to be a fully aquatic mammal. It's actually, if you look at the literature, it's undergone a drastic revision, and it's now portrayed as an ordinary land mammal, which is obviously far from being a primitive cetacean. And Ambulocetus, Rhodocetus, you can see them represented in displays and in museums and in textbook figures, and they're displayed as perfectly intermediate, transitioning into modern toothed whales, but at best it's misleading because the fossil evidence, and that's why I kind of developed my presentation by debunking fossils in general and showing all the abundance of information and evidence from flood geology, because fossils are fickle. They're fragmentary, sparse, and they're open to contrasting and contradictory interpretations. So at the end of the day, you got to explain the information lost based on mutations. But these fossils, Ambulocetus, Rhodocetus, for example, they are, they're scattered, fragmentary fossil remains, as I said, and distinguishing the bones are actually consistently absent. You can even look at Ambulocetus as a transitional form, for example. Doctors now, scientists studying this, they're actually noticing that it's very crocodile-like. And it actually, these scientists have doubts of its inclusion into the whale lineage now. They say that, Ambulocetus has eyes raised up on top of its head in a very strange way, and it's unusually large for an early whale, and that maybe it's not even in the main line of whale evolution. And unlike whales that have eyes on the side of their head, Ambulocetus had eyes near the top of its head, similar to a crocodile. So if leading evolutionary experts, think of it this way, if they seriously doubt Ambulocetus as a whale intermediate, shouldn't textbooks and shouldn't Dr. Frello here be a little bit more upfront and honest with the questionable nature of that supposed transitional fossil? Also, in regards to his new information, beneficial mutations. The thing is, a lot of them now, even if I gave him a couple, for example, it's still not going to counterbalance the damage, but a lot of it now is based on epigenetic markers, and they're used and acted to control and regulate the activity of our genes, right? So our epigenome can influence our physical appearance in much the same way as our genes do, but with no change to the underlying genetic code. For example, diet alters our teeth, swimming alters our spleen size, high altitude alters our chromosomes, hard work alters our bones. But the thing is, there's no large scale evolution, no new information is added, just expressed. He showed examples of water, fleas, bacteria. What was this here with skinks? Skinks are producing skinks, bacteria are producing bacteria, and he just spent 10 minutes trying to demonstrate how, skinks, bacteria, carrots, and whales are all related through common ancestry, but he needs to provide us a mechanism on how that's possible. And obviously, if you're going to appeal to bones found in the dirt, it's not going to be evidence, because when we look at the geology of the earth, when we look at fossils in general, present processes, they can't explain what we see. Rather, what we see points to catastrophic processes in the past, and that's confirmation of Noah's flood. So when we look in the present, actually, even when we look in the fossil record, we see stasis. We don't see any forward evolution. The best beneficial mutations you can come up with, they're mostly reductive. And losing information, even if you take a few steps up that mountain, but then 10 steps backward, you're not gonna climb that mountain just by losing information and degrading.
2 minutes and 15 seconds.
At the end there, he used nested hierarchies, and at the end of the day, basic rules of efficiency and function, they're definitely going to result in similar stages of, say, manufacturing. So if you want to look at nested hierarchies in DNA, right, mitochondrial DNA, or just kind of look at the forms themselves. It's obvious, we would find shared elements located in the blueprints. So look at that as the DNA of different manufacturing companies, say across the planet, whether it's Toyota, Chevy, Mercedes, and evidently if the end products have similarities, the blueprints, of course, by necessity have them as well. And that means transportation naturally fall and can be grouped into this, because I looked at his slide there and it said groups within groups is what they see, but means of transportation naturally fall and can be grouped into a hierarchical classification scheme. And nested hierarchies, though, they're agnostic to the question of creation and evolution, as there exist competing explanations. So we need to look to function. So patterns, for example, in DNA, nested hierarchical patterns, it's not going to prove either model, because nested hierarchies in general fails to reject either model. I mean, if we're made in the image of God, we can obviously get a sense for what kinds of design patterns God might have used by studying and examining the patterns that result from human designs. His transitionals that he showed as well. At the end of the day, we do predict mosaics, for example, and that's what we see. It's not the rule, and we can even look at human design. Some products of human design, they appear to span two categories, and I'm sure Dr. Frello would agree that boats and tanks would fall into entirely different classes. But what do we see? There exist vehicles that blends the features of these two very different means of transportation. So take an amphibious assault vehicle, for example. I know Dr. Frello probably knows about that, and it's resistant to classification, and Dr. Frello would look at that as the perfect example of a transitional form that is designed for the transitional environments between water and land. So I didn't see any evidence, any real substantial evidence for that type of large scale fish to fisherman evolution. Hopefully he can address the evidence that I provided. In the discussion period, we can go over certain models consisting of genetic entropy, created heterozygosity, but bones found in the dirt, those are evidence for a global flood, and certainly not evidence for that type of large-scale evolution. Frello, like I said, he needs to look at the bigger picture. We can talk about single examples of beneficial mutations and whether or not they add information, but in the long run, I can give him one or two. He's going to have to account for the accumulating damage selection. These are unselectable, these near-neutral mutations. So I want to see how he can explain that in order to take his fish to fisherman. How much time do I have, James? Okay, perfect. Thanks.
All right, and with that, we will switch to the rebuttal from Dr. Frello. So thank you very much, and I'll start on your first word.
I have a few slides here. I hope that I can find some that actually fits what Stefan was talking about. First, the genetic entropy. I just have to find it here. Genetic entropy. We're very fond of genetic entropy. Let's have a look at it. The concept is that the idea is that the genome will slowly degenerate over the course of generations, because harmful mutations will outnumber the beneficial ones, and they can't be selected for if they are sufficiently, if the effect of them are sufficiently low. But actually, what about this very common bacteria here, E. coli? If this has existed for 6,000 years only, and the deleterious mutations has been accumulating, well, E. coli has tens of generations for every day, and if this has been going on for 6,000 years, there must have been millions of generations. And if one mutation occurs every 1,000 generations, then there must have been tens of thousands of mutations. E. coli has between 4,000 and 5,500 genes. It depends on the strain. So each and every gene must have been affected by several mutations. So why does E. coli still exist? Why didn't it go extinct a long time ago if this genetic entropy model is actually working? But the thing is that it is not working, because even very slight deleterious mutations will be selected against. And will disappear from the environment. Here, and actually there is a mechanism that can sort out deleterious mutations, even if they are mixed with beneficial ones. Because recombination, if we have the first two lines here, the red one represents the chromosome from the mother, and the blue one, the chromosome from the father. And the circular yellow dots are deleterious mutations or slightly harmful mutations, and the star is a slightly beneficial mutation. And recombination is illustrated by the three next lines. And as you see, things can be swapped around so that the beneficial mutation is alone on a chromosome, and the deleterious mutations are combined on one chromosome. So even if the deleterious and or slightly harmful and slightly beneficial mutations occur on the same chromosome, then after recombination, some chromosomes will contain only harmful and some will contain only the beneficial ones. And of course, the individuals that end up with only the beneficial chromosome or only the beneficial mutations will do better than those that will end up with the harmful ones. So this recombination process will help evolution getting rid of the harmful mutations. I skip this one. I think I'll go back to the main thing. So, well, generally the idea of genetic entropy has not been accepted by the scientific community. It is very, very hard to find any papers in mainstream scientific journals about genetic entropy. So generally, I think we can consider that idea as dead. The beneficial mutations. I think I will try to figure out. Yeah, no, we can take this one. You showed us this one of Nathaniel Jeanson's result on the human mitochondrial DNA from his book Replacing Darwin. Well, actually, I have made a rather long review of Replacing Darwin, which occurs in the Answers Research Journal. And Jeanson has responded to that, and we have had a discussion over 4 papers in that journal, so people should look that up. I talk about this in those articles too. Actually, it is nonsense. The 3 green arrows should be, according to Jeanson and Standing, should be the mitochondrial genomes of the 3 wives of Noah's sons. But it can't be, because every line here is representing time. So if these 3 yellow arrows are the 3 wives of Noah's sons, then they should live at different times in history. And one of them, or actually 2 of them, should be the descendants of the 3rd one. If the central green arrow is the oldest one, then the 2 others should be the descendants of that woman, and that is not what is taking place on the story about Noah's wives. And actually, these 3 haplogroups that Standing was talking about, they don't exist. There are not 3 haplogroups. The N and M haplogroup is part of one of the L haplogroups. So there is no three haplogroups in the way that Standing was talking about. Also, Jeanson rules out Neanderthals from his picture here, and for a very good reason, because if he included the Neanderthals, it would be clear that they are way too much different from all the modern humans to fit into his model. Neanderthals are not very different from each other, but they are more different. They are twice as different from modern humans than modern humans are from each other. So they do not fit in any way into the model. And if you look at the details of the differences in the mitochondrial genome of Neanderthals and modern humans, it is very, very clear that a lot of selection has been taking place. You can see at the pattern of it's a bit difficult to explain, but if you look at the pattern of the differences between Neanderthal and modern humans in mitochondrial DNA, you can tell that a lot of selection must have been taking place. Actually, there must have been a lot more mutations than is actually visible in the differences, because most of them has been selected against. So including Neanderthals in this pattern will completely destroy the argument. Was that the time?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Frello. And with that, we will now move into what I consider maybe the most exciting part of the debate. So this is just going to be open dialogue for 12 minutes. And with that, I will start the timer, and then gentlemen, the questions that you may have for each other, anything like that, you are free to ask during this open discussion time.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Dr. Frello. I appreciate your opening and rebuttal. I know there's a lot to cover and go over, so hopefully we can do a few rounds of this. We can consider this round one, but if we can just start it off, can we agree at least on, the word biological evolution? Like, I would say evolution, if by evolution you mean a change in allele frequency and populations over generations, or gene frequency and population over generations. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's good. I think because I was looking at your rebuttal to genetic entropy and some of the things you said, like natural selection, say some beneficial mutations, for example. But like, obviously we don't disagree that natural selection exists. Some beneficial mutations exist, whether it's epigenetic or whatever it is. But what I'm saying in regards to, what I'm proposing here is that natural selection, it's only going to remove the worst deleterious and say detrimental mutations. And then it's only going to amplify the very, very best beneficial mutations. But what I think that indicates and suggests is that the accumulating damage, Dr. Frello, it's largely invisible and unselectable. Because if we're accumulating 100 new mutations per person per generation, that's what, 700 billion new mutations this generation alone. So how do you account for that damage? Go ahead, Dr. Frello.
Well, I don't know if I understand this right, but it seems as if you think that most harmful mutations are so slightly harmful that they will go unnoticed. But if that was true, then why isn't, for instance, my bacteria example, why isn't all the bacteria then gone by now? Because if that process actually was going on, then all the genes in, for instance, E. coli should have gone through several harmful mutations, so many that most of the genes would be left without any function, and the bacteria would be dead. But they are not. So I think that well, in bacteria that can be accounted for by simply the selection against all the harmful mutations. and the bacteria is simply dying.
Okay, well, if you don't mind, if you don't mind, I can definitely. Well, because the thing is, if these unselectables, right? Because say a neutral mutation, we can argue all day whether or not they're near neutral. If there's a tiny fitness effect like rust on a car, it's continuous, it's destructive, but you can't see each rust event. But in regards to your bacterial example, like I noticed you did, and I appreciate that as a rebuttal. You did make a big deal about bacteria and say Lenski's long-term bacterial experiments, but it actually seems, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, that experiment, and even bacteria in general, I mean, you can look up papers involving reductive evolution in bacteria where they lose genes short-term just for adaptive purposes, but it seems like bacteria in general, Lenski's experiment, for example, it actually supports the thesis of genetic entropy, because I'm not disagreeing that there was, a trivial adaptation that did happen, because it's optimal growth on a given medium, right? And this bacteria, Lenski's bacteria, it appears to have, shrank in genome size, which means the functional genome decreased. So even though there was, rapid growth, it seems like it was largely accomplished through genetic degeneration. So if these bacteria, if they're painting themselves into a corner, if they're getting rid of genes short term, but it's long-term degeneration, and what we see in bacteria is reductive evolution. Obviously, you would agree bacteria, they go through more rounds of selection, there's more generations. I mean, Lenski, he's shown what, over 50,000 generations of bacteria. So if we're seeing degenerative adaptation, and then it's accomplished by means of loss of function, loss of regulation, mutations, how are you going to address, the net loss of information? Because if it comes down to a net gain versus a net loss, it seems like bacteria actually supports our thesis. And how do you feel about the pandemic of disease we see? Entropic degeneration on all levels, Dr. Frello. Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, asthma, autoimmune diseases, cancers, immunological diseases. I mean, don't we see it in everything? And then, how do you feel about my response in regards to bacteria? Go ahead.
My turn? Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, some of the examples in Lenski's bacteria is actually that they accumulate. Well, they do lose functional genes, that they do, and they do lose function in genes that are still there. But they also gain or accumulate genetic material, as I showed you, duplications, which are actually beneficial, because you can see that if the same duplication is occurring in, or is found in several independent strains of bacteria, it must be because it is beneficial. Because I think I lost the. Thank you. It must be because it's beneficial, because the duplications occur completely randomly, or more or less randomly around the genome, and most of them are lost again. So if you find the same duplication in several strains, then at least the best explanation is that it is actually beneficial gain of genetic information. But also one of the things I did not get to is that,
and I want you to continue, just because I noticed you did say, so these bacteria, they did lose genes, lose some function, but there were some adaptive gains at the same time. Plus they're looking at gene duplications, and I'll respond to all that later, but because I'm just writing things down. So so you do agree with that part? Like there has been some loss there, some genes have been, there has been some reductive evolution observed, specifically in okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, keep going, Dr. Frello.
Yes, but yes, thank you. Yes, but it goes both ways. It loses some, it gains some, and talking about gaining information, there are a number of reports in Drosophila, in fruit flies, which proves or shows that.
If you're going to go to fruit flies, if you're going to go to fruit flies, that's okay. I just want to at least, because if we're going to jump from bacteria to fruit flies, I just want us to end the portion on bacteria. So I noticed you said, yeah, there was some loss seen, there was some adaptation seen. I said I agreed that there was adaptation seen. There is a functional shrinking genome observed as well. And you mentioned gene duplications, but it seems like gene duplications, for one, they're rare, and then when they do occur, they're almost universally deleterious. So what I would be saying is that a few rare beneficial duplications, they're not going to be able to offset the many accumulating deleterious duplications, and then let alone all the other accumulating mutations, point mutations, deletions, whatever. And it sounds like you're talking about a trade-off, right? So you got some I guess some mutations where there's loss of function, loss of information, while you have, adaptive gains on the other side. But it seems like this trade-off, and I want to see what you think about this, then we can jump to the fruit flies. It seems like this trade-off, Dr. Frello, it doesn't seem like it's sustainable, because while the genome, it's degenerating, and while a few nucleotide sites may be improving, huge numbers are obviously being degraded, because beneficials are rare to begin with. I think you agree with that. So that type of trade-off, how is it going to be sustainable? And then it results in a shrinking functional genome size, which is exactly what we see in Lenski's experiment. So it seems like all this information supports the thesis of genetic entropy. Go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry, James, what were you saying?
I was just going to say that let's give Dr. Frello plenty of time to respond, just to make sure that he gets plenty of time.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that if we were going to jump to another topic, I just want to go one topic at a time. So the fruit flies, I'm happy to talk about. I just wanted to.
We'll just let him respond. I just want to make sure that he gets to respond to all of the points that you've made. That way there aren't any points that you've made that kind of get lost in the debate without having had a response from Dr. Frello. So,
of course,
Dr. Frello, the floor is yours.
Yep. Go ahead, Dr. Frello.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Well, I don't have a great problem admitting, or whatever you would call it. I don't think admitting is the right word. That the Lenski experiment resulted in gain and loss of information in the bacteria, but they are living in a very restrained environment. So it's not, well, the main story there is not whether the netto is loss or gain, but that both gain and loss can happen. So we can have accumulation of genetic information in the bacteria, which some creationists, I don't think that you have ever said that, but some creationists claim that there is no known mechanism for accumulating new genetic information, and that is simply a lie. I hope we can agree on that.
Well, I'll let you continue. I would just say that there's no definitive.
Standing. We just don't have a lot of time left for the discussion section, so forgive me. I just want to make sure that Dr. Frello gets to respond to each of the points that you've made.
Okay, understandable. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. But I think it would be instead of just keeping on going on the bacteria, I would insist in mentioning these reports on the fruit fly, because there it is clear. The details are sometimes a bit difficult to explain, but it is the results are quite clear that new what is called de novo gene formation is actually taking place.
Are these orphan genes that are?
Let me finish, please. DNA sequences with no function as the production of proteins, or with no coding function of proteins, are in these fruit flies have been shown to mutate to actually functional protein producing genes. And it has happened over and over and over again, and it has resulted in some strains of a single species having a different component of the genes than other strains. So even within a single species, this can be observed. So I don't think that it is reasonable to question that genetic information can accumulate in the genome. Of course, genetic information can be lost. I don't think that anyone has ever denied that. But the interesting thing is that within the last 2 decades or so, evidence has been accumulating that accumulation of genetic information are taking place in ways that the biologists didn't dream of a couple of decades ago, and that is very important in the.
And then, can I respond now, Jay?
I'm really sorry, Standing for Truth. You'll get a chance to respond, but unfortunately, it's got to be in one of your timed sections because we've actually run out of time for the open discussion.
Okay.
So thank you both very much for that. And next up, we will go to the 5-minute closing. So I will set the timer for 5 minutes, and then once you are ready, Standing for Truth, I will start the timer.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. I do hope for a few more rounds. This is fun. Yeah, so he's talking about, a trade-off here, and obviously it's not going to be sustainable. It is about net gain versus net loss. I've shown that most claimed examples of beneficials are actually epigenetic regulation anyways, but basically what he's doing here is he's throwing lots of information. He's throwing out lots of information from lots of nucleotide sites and then trying to replace all that information with, desirable mutations. So the fact that most beneficials are reductive and things are not being taken forward, they're actually degrading. It's not going to help the fish to fishermen. And bacteria certainly supports the thesis of genetic entropy. But the thing is, species, they can undergo these minor adaptive fine-tuning to its environment, like Dr. Frello talks about here, but that doesn't mean that they're not still degenerating in many other ways. I mean, picture let's say a 15-year-old car. It's degenerating in all possible ways. You can install new windshield wipers, you can change out the tires, you can do whatever you want, but has the car stopped degenerating? Obviously there has been somewhat of an improvement, but that type of improvement's not going to reverse the actual degeneration, and that's why it is about net gain versus net loss. So Dr. Frello here, he's going to have to present us with thousands of examples of these types of beneficial mutations that add new, novel, and meaningful information to the genome to take his bacteria-like organism into a whale. Or else he's gonna fail. He's gonna fail to address the key issue, which is net gain versus net loss. And there's just overwhelming evidence for genetic entropy that I showed earlier. I mean, we see it in bacteria. We see that it's a pandemic currently: Alzheimer's, dementia, autism. I don't want to spend too much time on that. I want to go on what he talked about earlier as well in his rebuttal period. He talked about the Neanderthals as well in regards to the LMN. And at the end of the day, there are explanations coming from the young Earth creation side. Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson, for example, and even Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson talks about how in his own experience working with DNA, say from living species, there is a problem of, DNA degradation. So these ancient, DNA samples, are they giving good solid results, or are they giving unreliable and unpredictable results? But he's also made testable predictions on that as well, because for one, the model that young Earth creationists propose here easily accounts for all the mitochondrial DNA differences among modern peoples. And the proposed explanation, as Dr. Frello knows, he's had written debates with Dr. Jeanson, for Neanderthal DNA is either degradation or lineage-specific mutation acceleration. So those explanations flow from Dr. Jeanson's explanations for modern mitochondrial DNA differences. And as Dr. Frello knows, predictions have been made on the Khoisan peoples. Testable predictions have been made on this map of humanity. And LMN, they're separated by short differences, and they're unique. So there are 3 major haplogroups. I know he talked about, whether or not they exist or not, but that would indicate that they are unique. They're separated by short lines, while the lines radiating out from them are long, indicating post-flood times. And the placement of the root at the L node, that makes testable and falsifiable predictions on the stamp of humanity. Hopefully next time we can go more into detail on that. Dr. Frello, going to have to address my evidence on the fossils. He's going to have to address the evidence in regards to Y chromosome Adam, the evidence for mitochondrial Eve. I mean, all genetic evidence does point to, for one, in regards to genetic entropy, a once perfect creation, as well as Adam and Eve, a literal interpretation of Genesis. Let me see what else he talked about here. Yeah, if he's going to talk about these beneficials, for example, the fruit flies, he's looking at de novo gene synthesis. And at the end of the day, that's circular, because he's seeing these taxonomically restricted genes known as orphan genes, which actually points to a biblical-based model and created kind. So it's actually hypothetical storytelling. There's a lot of storytelling coming from the atheist and the evolutionist, but orphan genes, once again, support biblical creation. Did you say my time was up, James?
Time now. Thank you very much, Standing for Truth. Next up, we will go to the closing statement of Dr. Frello. So I have the timer up with 5 minutes, and we'll start it on your first word, Dr. Frello.
Okay. This story about Nathaniel Jeanson's figure of the mitochondrial DNA from modern humans, the star-like illustration that Standing was showing, if people can remember that. Well, I will have to refer to my articles, mine and Jeanson's articles in the Answers Research Journal. It's easy to look them up, and they are open access, so you don't have to pay for it. So you can read it there, because I think that Jeanson is doing a lousy job defending his theory. Degeneration of Neanderthal DNA is no explanation whatsoever, as I show in my article. But it's very technical, so I can't explain further here. The fossil story. Well, what shall I say? Well, of course, fossils are mostly only fractions of the original animal, but I think it is, as I showed, the oldest layers, the Ediacara layers, which shows only fossils that are almost impossible to recognize as even on the phylum level. You cannot see if this is a mollusk or arthropod or a vertebrate or whatever it is, and probably it is neither, because those phyla didn't exist at that time. And I think it is very strange. You have this, from a creationist point of view, I think you should be wondering, where are all the bony fish? Why is the Ediacara and the Cambria, why are there no fish? I mean, in the ocean today, fish are everywhere. It's hard to see how you can have a very diverse collection of fossils of all kinds of animals, very diverse animals all over the world, or not all over the world, but in many parts of the world, find faunas with a diversity of animals, but never, ever any bony fish. Why not? And why are they so strange? Why are all the Cambrian animals extinct? There are none of them that resemble any animal living today. I never seen creationists even address that question, but it should disturb one. From an evolutionary point of view, that at least is easy to explain. The Cambrian explosion is a great problem. Everyone admits that. Darwin himself admitted that in his book 150 years ago, and everyone since then has admitted that the Cambrian explosion is a great problem, and we have no good explanation. People have tried, but I don't think that there's any consensus on any explanation for that. But that's not the only. I should say we are not the only ones having problems with the Cambrians. The creationists have problems with that too. The difference is that scientists admitted creationists don't. The de novo genes, well, I think that question is actually rather complicated, and the arguments pro and con is rather elaborate. So it would be, I think, if we could arrange a somewhat shorter discussion on that topic, or concentrated on the topic of mutations, perhaps beneficial, harmful mutations, genetic entropy, de novo genes, things like that, and then have a discussion on that, centered on that topic alone, then it would be better than to make a half a story here. So if we could arrange that, that would be very, very nice. Yeah, was that it? 30 seconds. Okay. You were talking. You mentioned some arguments from geology, but I have skipped that because I'm not a geologist and I don't have the expertise to answer that. I know that geologists don't think that the arguments of creationists are any valid, but I can't argue in such a discussion, so I leave that. Yeah.
I just realized I was on mute. That's embarrassing. I'm sorry about that. All the time. Whenever I'm streaming in a public place, I sometimes have to mute myself, and I forget to unmute. But
You're forgiven, brother. You did a great job.
all I was saying was, we had a couple of new subscribers, Jadoon and Hubbles. Saw you subscribe. If I missed anybody out there who subscribed during the stream, want to say thanks so much. In addition to Jadoon and Hubbles 41 for subscribing, we're thrilled to have you here, no matter what your view on this or all the other topics from this channel happens to be. So, also we have a super chat from Steven Steen. I guess I have to read it, but he says, for James being such a beautiful person inside and out. That's very nice of you, Steven. I appreciate that.
I'm digging your haircut. You look good, James.
Makes me blush every time. So
perhaps I should have a haircut.
You look good too, Dr. Frello.
Very sharp. So with that, we will go to the other questions. So thanks so much for your questions, and if you have any others, I gotta say we probably have to close the Q&A in a few minutes for question intake. But if you have questions in the next few minutes, you can submit them, and we'll try to get to them, even though I can't promise it. But we're gonna try. So we're starting with Jay Segal. Thanks for your question. He says, question for the theist. His name is on the border. But question for Standing for Truth. Do you think people are idiots? It is obvious you were playing word games. Standing for Truth, you can give a response if you want.
No, I think if you look at a lot of the creation scientists that are doing a lot of the actual frontline work, say Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson, who I know Dr. Frello has had a really good, lengthy, profitable written debate with, which I've really enjoyed reading. And you know what? These guys are doing the work. They're not lying. They're putting in the work to give us testable and falsifiable predictions. So at the end of the day, it's not just all word games. There is evidence, and it's about the evolutionists to address the evidence and counter the evidence. Thanks, James.
You got it. Also, James Downard, question for Standing for Truth, one of your old rivals. He asked, did you fact check cold slab claim of Tim Clary at primary source level? If so, how did you not spot the data he'd left out that disproved his interpretation?
Well, it's not really an interpretation. It's a direct prediction that was made 10 years before the actual seismic tomography data came out. They look at SMPs and all this stuff, and the prediction is it's pretty straightforward, right? If these plates, based on catastrophic plate tectonics, they're being pushed down, they haven't had time to melt. And so with this data, we've learned that these massive slabs of cold rock do exist at the base of the mantle, which means they've been pushed down there recently and they haven't melted. So whether the source data, whether the original paper, you know, the author obviously holds to a uniformitarian and an evolutionist worldview, but it is consistent with our model. And sure, he's going to interpret the data differently, but at the end of the day, it is huge confirmation of the global flood model, and more specifically, the model of CPT. Thanks, James.
You bet. Next up, Lucifer Almighty asks, question for standing for truth. I'm going to kind of stagger these. I'm going to alternate them so that way Dr. Frello gets some questions too, because he does have some scattered throughout, but most of them are for standing for truth. So just so anybody knows if it seems out of order, but we'll do one more for standing for truth before we go to one of the questions for Dr. Frello. This question is, Lucifer Almighty asks, what scientific evidence do you have for these long human lifespans?
Well, we have the historical evidence, and you can see in my opening presentation, I showed the graph of the decay curve. You can see, based on low impact, near neutral deleterious mutation accumulation, you can plot this graph and compare it to the decay curve as seen in Genesis. You can see the ages, you can plot them, you can see that they drastically decrease after the flood. So obviously that could relate to mutation accumulation and after effects of the flood. We see evidence, there's thousands of legends of the golden age where people live to hundreds and hundreds of years old. And you know what? Legends usually come from a common source, just like flood legends. They all come from a common source. The global flood story is found in the Bible. So plenty of evidence historically and scientifically.
Gotcha. Next question. This one's for Dr. Frello from Landon Freeman. He says, what evidence would convince you of limited common descent within kinds as opposed to universal common descent?
The finding of an organism with details from different phyla. For instance, an insect with a vertebrate eye, or vice versa, a vertebrate with an insect eye. And the argument, well, I sense, I don't know if it's correct, but some has pointed out that there's a size difference here, that vertebrate eyes works better in larger size and insect eyes works better in small size. But there's a huge, hey, am I on? Yeah. But there's actually a huge overlap. The smallest bird, the hummingbirds, are smaller than the largest insects, and their eye size are approximately the same. So there is no good reason, from a creationist point of view, at least I haven't heard one, there's no good reason why an insect should not be fine with a vertebrate-like eye, or why a small vertebrate should not be doing fine with an insect-like compound eye. Something like that. Any combination of traits that is impossible or impossible from an evolutionary point of view would do the job and convince me. But I think that you should ask our creationist friends the same question. What would convince him?
You got it. Standing for truth, if you want to answer that, you can. Otherwise...
Are you just talking about, Dr. Frello, like different, because there's different eye structures out there as compared to, are you looking for a very specific eye structure that would
No, it doesn't matter very much. But it could also, be, the mollusks has, some of them have eyes that superficially look like vertebrate eyes, but the retina and the nerve cells are vice versa. The layer of the nerve cells connected to the light absorbing cells, the retina, is upside down in the vertebrate eyes compared to the mollusk eyes. And if you could show me a mollusk with a vertebrate style eye with that construction, or a vertebrate with the mollusk style eye, that would probably do the job. But I don't think you can. And
Well, I think
could I finish it? That's actually I don't think that I ever heard a good explanation for good explanation. I heard some very silly explanations, but I have never heard a good explanation why there are this difference in the eye structure of mollusks and the vertebrates.
Since it's your question, I'll just kind of end it really quick. I think it's just evidence of the creative handiwork of God. For example, you look at a manufacturing company or a car company like Volkswagen. They make the Volkswagen Jetta, with a regular engine or a diesel engine. You see, you can get a Chevy Cruze in a turbo. You can get a Chevy Cruze in a rear-wheel drive. It's just different designs. Just like we see different designs, eye structures in vertebrates and different life on Earth. So I think that is pretty easily explainable through common design.
Gotcha.
But may I comment on that, Dorothy?
Let's see. I suppose I could, but given that the question was for you, it's a little bit difficult because you want to get to as many.
Let's go on to the next.
Okay. Next one, Common Sense Guy asks, I think this is for Standing for Truth. He says, if there are 3 starting points for the creationist... If there are 3 starting points for the creationist starting point, how did everything be created, or how was everything created?
Well, I'm not sure what he means by 3 starting points. As recorded in Genesis, we see that God created the heaven and the earth. He spoke the universe into existence. We see that he created Adam and Eve, and we can look at the entire story of Genesis. If you go to the flood, we can see that that's why we make the predictions based on the 3 major haplogroups L, M, N. If we're using these different starting points, we can make retrodictions, predictions. That's why we can see evidence for a mitochondrial Eve. We can see evidence for a Y chromosome Adam, and we can see evidence for these very few mitochondrial lineages. So I'm not sure what he means by multiple starting points, but I don't know.
Gotcha. He does have a follow-up question, so that might explain it. But Walter White, by the way, so that one was related enough. Do you guys want to field questions that are not directly related to the debate?
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay with me.
Okay, this one is, Walter White, thanks for your question. They asked, is Dr. Frello a real doctor or a doctor like Dr. Kent Hovind?
I am, in the sense that a PhD is a real doctor, then I am a real doctor. I have a PhD in botany and a Master of Science in Mathematics and Molecular Biology.
You bet.
And I just want to ask, how many times did you debate Dr. Hovind? Wasn't it 4 or 5 times? I definitely recommend people watch those debates. Very good, very engaging.
It was 4 times. I think he gave up on me. We had an agreement on the 5th debate, but I never heard from him again. I don't know if he was afraid of me or he just thought that I was too stupid to deal with. But we never came on to a 5th debate. But it was a thrilling experience. He's a very tough guy to talk to.
Gotcha. Next up, the Common Sense Guy. This one this is where it's also not super related. Standing for Truth. If you're okay with it, I'm okay with it.
Go ahead.
The Common Sense Guy asks, if God created those 3 starting points, who created God?
Which I'm not sure which 3 starting points he's talking about.
Yeah, I'm not either.
We do have starting points. When we read the Bible, we know that the Bible tells us that it's the history book of the universe. That's why we can make these direct retrodictions and predictions based on the fact that, according to the Bible, we all came from 2 people, Adam and Eve. And what do we see in empirical scientific data? We see that every single human being on this earth is incredibly similar. We see low genetic diversity. That is evidence that we came from 2 people. That's why the evolutionists themselves, they have to resort to a population bottleneck, a near extinction event. But at the end of the day, that population bottleneck of say 10,000 people. I've seen other evolutionists say even 1,000. That would have been genetically compromised due to inbreeding and such. So that rescue device is more of a story than anything empirical. So I'm not sure what the 3 starting points are, but any starting point that I can look at in Genesis makes accurate predictions and retrodictions.
You got it. Next up, Condor Man asks, standing for truth. Oh, I think I might have missed some of your questions, Condor Man, or Candor Man. Forgive me for that if I missed any, because this says question 4, and so if I did. He asked, what explains the KT boundary, and why are there no dinosaurs fossils above it?
James, can you repeat that real quick, brother?
You bet. He says, what explains the KT, so K as in kite, and T as in...
Oh, okay, yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, don't worry, I got it now.
And why are there no dinosaur fossils found above it?
So I think he's talking about the iridium layer, where the layers found near the top of the rock record would indicate that the start and middle point of, say, the global flood, and I did give some data for that at the beginning of the debate, where this worldwide volcanic activity, because there certainly would have been volcanic activity. Just look at Genesis, the fountains of the Great Deep break open. It was happening, and it was putting as much material into the atmosphere, then of course falling down during the late stages of the flood, because it's going to be trapped for some time in the atmosphere, of course, for a while before actually coming down during the later stages of the flood. So it came down and produced that tiny layer, that iridium layer. Then later on, more flood sediments covered it, creating the KT boundary. And I think the evolutionists will say that it's the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, that crash landed. But at the end of the day, I think the global flood model and volcanic activity perfectly explains. I think the fact that there's no fossils found in there, I think that's evidence against evolution. I don't think that's a problem for me.
Gotcha. Next up, looking for if there are any more for Dr. Frello so he can get some action during the Q&A. Landon Freeman asks, what is your view, so this is for Dr. Frello, what is your view on scientists who are skeptical of natural selection being a creative force, such as Michael Denton and the late Lynn Margolis, if I pronounce that right?
Well, Lynn, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he's most famous for coming up with the theory that the mitochondria is leftovers from endogenous bacteria, the bacteria that has been taken up by another organism, and the mitochondria are the leftovers from that event. I don't know. Well, I don't think that I have any comment on that question. I'm sorry. Another thing, I think it's irritating that people uses anonymous or pseudonyms. Why? Why not just your name? That's to use standing for truth also.
Is that sorry, just to be sure I understand, is it more of a rhetorical question, or is it
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, probably more rhetorical.
Okay, that's all right. Gotcha. Next up, we have a question from James Downard. RJ asks, for standing for truth, did Lenski's bacteria have plastids? I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And what is the relevance of that regarding their evolutionary dynamics?
What is the relevance of that according to their evolutionary dynamics?
That's right.
I mean, you can go read the direct paper that Lenski originally came out with, plus you can read Michael Behe's new book on Darwin Devolves, who really and thoroughly addresses Lenski's E. coli experiment, and Lenski responded to that. So you can kind of see a back and forth between them, but the actual direct answer to that question, I'm not too sure. I'll have to pass it on to Dr. Frello.
Well, I don't know if plastics, I guess that he's thinking of plastics in bacteria. perhaps he's thinking of the plasmids, small circular DNA molecules, but I don't know if they have any role in Lenski's experiment. I haven't come across that.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
Gotcha. And
So I think the answer is we don't know.
You know what, Dr. Frello? After this debate, we'll both go look it up together.
Yeah, let's do that.
let's see. Walter White asks Dr. Frello, have you ever been at the Comic Con in San Diego? I guess not, because if you had seen all the nerds there, you wouldn't dispute genetic entropy. I think this is probably meant to be a joke. I don't even get it, to be honest. I mean, not to say it's a bad joke.
No,
it's just...
I haven't been in San Diego.
Okay.
The answer is no.
Okay. Sorry if I didn't understand the joke. I think it's just because the content is foreign to me. So, emotionally stunted emoticon. We have time for one question. So, one more question. So, sorry about that, folks. We didn't get to all of them, but they asked, why, standing for truth, why don't we find any crabs? And they put any in capital letters. So, like 0. Crabs, marine tetrapods, bony fish in the Cambrian. Or why don't we find any marine tetrapods appearing before the origin of tetrapods in the Devonian?
Yeah, you know what? That's a good question. You know, it has to do with the flood burial. I'm actually glad that he asked it. You know, like evolutionists like him, he'll say that certain fossils should not be found with other fossils, and apparently that's proof of evolutionary descent with modification and evidence against, the biblical Genesis flood. And the thing is, it all comes down to habitats. Just like today, you know, different creatures and different animals live in different habitats in the pre-flood world. And the pre-flood world's gone. So, I mean, we can speculate, we can come up with hypotheses, but we see certain fossils that are usually buried together, and dinosaur fossils are usually buried with like gymnosperms and pines and naked sea plants, whereas mammal fossils, for example, they're usually buried with things such as flowering plants. So this indicates two very different ecosystems, because it's a burial by ecosystems. And I'll use dinosaurs for example. You know, although they lived at the same time of man, they did not necessarily live in the same areas or habitats. They were overcome by the flood at different times during the advancing of the waters, and that explains why we don't find them buried together, including the specifics that he mentioned. So burial by ecosystems and habitats. One final thing, it's important that in Genesis you see that the land of Eden, we're told that a river flows out of Eden, and we know rivers flow downhill. And so Eden was obviously at a higher elevation, and we know certain animals, such as certain dinosaurs, lived in swampy lowland areas. And so various animals of various ecosystems and habitats, they're separated from man and other forms of life. So simple answer to his question, different ecosystems, different habitats, and different burial at different times of the flood. Thanks, James.
Can I make a very short comment? Can I make a very short comment on that?
Of course, Dr. Frello. You get the last words there.
Except that nowadays, at least, there are, I think, no oceanic ecosystem without bony fish. And I think it is very, very hard to find any terrestrial ecosystem without flowering plants.
But I mean, the pre-flood world was obviously different. I mean, can you tell me exactly what the pre-flood
why should it be different in this sense?
I think that I'm sorry to cut in. Just I know that you've got a You've got a round in the chamber ready to go, standing for truth. I don't doubt that, but I just to kind of keep on moving, because I promised that I would keep this wrapped up in a timely manner, and sorry about that.
That's okay. Very enjoyable debate. I enjoyed it a lot, Dr. Frello. Maybe we can do there's so much to cover. We covered a lot of things, so hopefully around 2, maybe 3, maybe 20 in the future.
Well, I should think it should be a little more focused next time. I am definitely into another debate with you, but I think it should be a little more focused, because we try to get here and there and everywhere, and yeah, I think a more focused debate on a more focused subject would be better.
I think this one, being a more general creation versus evolution, around two can be a little more focused on one specific topic or portion of what we discussed here, right? For example, I don't know, the haplogroups or Dr. Jeanson's works, or genetic entropy, whatever one you so choose. So I thank you again, Dr. Frello.
Okay. I think we have each other's email addresses, so we can work this out.
We have one super chat just came in. Forgive me and then if we can just standing for truth. Could you? This is from Brian G. Thanks for your super chat. We appreciate it, Brian G. By the way, everybody, we are buying a hard drive for a new computer we just got, so that we can start running at a better quality video than 480p. Every once in a while, I see somebody in the live chat who's like, "Why are they going at 480?" Well, we're going to upgrade, and our video picture is going to be a lot better. But so thanks for your contribution to that, Brian G. He says, standing for truth, could you tell us about the turtle hooves? This is new to me. I don't know but if you know what he's talking about, Standing, he had asked, standing for truth.
I would just respond with watch Mattman and myself series debunking the non sequitur show, and I think you'll get an answer to your question.
Gotcha. And with that, I want to say thanks so much to our speakers for being here. We sincerely appreciate it that they would share their passion with us here at Modern Day Debate, and thanks so much for their patience as we work out all the tech stuff and all that. I promise someday we're going to be running quick and strong, even stronger and quicker. So thanks to our speakers, and thank you for everybody's questions during the Q&A. Really appreciate it. And with that, want to just wish everybody well. We hope you have a great rest of your day or night. Want to say also, Dr. Frello was kind enough to debate, even though it's very late. It's getting pretty late where he is. I think is it close to 10 right now? He's in Denmark, so he was kind enough to debate at night. So with that, just want to say thanks for coming by, and keep sifting through the reasonable from the unreasonable. Take care, everybody.